This is welcome. This is the continuing conversation that we're having over 4 weeks. This is like a learning sprint of an introduction to the notion of equity governance, equity moonshot, and equity muses. There's a blog post that goes into all those details. One thing that I've been trying to emphasize is asking people to share the stories. And I remember, Kathleen, your story will stay with me forever. The one you told me, it was just unbelievable. And I still would like to go even deeper into that story if you have time and inclination. It needs to be written up. But anyway, and I actually wrote up my own story and updated it, and I shared it with Lisa just to give her a feel for the notion of telling your inequity story. And the idea behind it is to slowly build momentum to increase the conversations about how to give people a voice to their own perspectives on equity. And we all know there's a lot of inequity about who can give voice to those issues. So I'm just going to put that into the story that I wrote up as a model for others, and I'm going to invite other people to do the same thing. And actually, I have to say, it was I had somebody else lined up, and then I met Lisa on the Zoom call yesterday, and I said, wow, would you come and share some of your stories? So I thought what we'd do is allow Lisa to speak to her own experience of dealing with equities, whatever story she would like to tell. We can stop after that. We'll see how long it goes, and I have some other questions. So Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself first of all, say who you are, and then perhaps share a story? We'll see where it goes. I have some other prompts that we can, feed into depending upon the flow of the conversation.
Sure. So I'm Lisa Marie Harris. Oh, you want Lisa Berkley? Thank you.
You can go ahead, but you know what, Lisa, please go ahead and start.
I'm like, because I had to walk out, and then I didn't know if I was being called upon.
I so understand that. But since you started, I would love to hear. No. Oh, please. Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
This is your show.
Well, yeah, but we're in this together. And actually, when we talk about equity, that's really the key topic, right? We're all in this together. So I do hope that we can hear more about who you are and hear who other folks are on this call as well. But thank you, Rick, for bringing us together, and thank you to Witty too for hosting this call. I think conversations around equity are so very, very important. I've been working in the human rights and social justice field sector for more than 30 years. My background originally was in the healing arts, although even before that, my education was environmental science and economics. And really, sort of the question, which has always been the undergirding for all that I do, is how do we build a world in which individuals and communities can thrive in relationship to one another and to the planet and all of the species who live on our planet. And so it's been I could spend forever giving a walkthrough of my life journey, but where I am today is I'm physically situated in Marina, California, which is the home originally of the Esalen tribe. And we are on Monterey Bay in California. And I teach at UC Santa Cruz, and I am both the director of a well-being and resiliency program, which I founded, and also a founding director with my colleagues at the Center for Applied Values and Ethics in Advancing Technologies, or CAVIAT. And I teach ethics and technology, or the intersection of ethics and technology and its application to society and governance, as well as a course called Finding Your Purpose. And so it's a course in which we do self-reflection, but as it relates to the world, and how do we achieve our goals and visions to making the world a better place, and how do we live a fulfilling life so that we can thrive. So that's kind of where I'm at. I guess I should also mention that I bridge the academic practitioner gap. So I am a former city council member in my city, and I am also the founder of the Institute for Inner Economy, which provides education and trainings that, again, bridge the academic and practitioner gap, giving people and communities the tools for thriving, and beginning with self-awareness, and how do we identify ourselves as individuals, but also as community, and then how do we draw from our strengths to support one another. So that's kind of a very big overarching view of where I'm at now. But what really brought me here is my conversation yesterday with Rick and some other colleagues. And when Rick reached out, I thought, sure, I'd love to discuss equity. And the story that I had shared was about how do we build equity in governance, and not just governments, but in political engagement. And so I don't know, Rick, maybe you should, I'm of two minds right now. One, to jump back onto that story, but also maybe to start with where I first became aware of issues of equity, because it really has been a lifelong sort of calling and questioning. Maybe I should start there.
By all means.
Okay, so when I grew up, my parents divorced when I was very, very young. And part of my world through my father was a tremendous world of privilege, extreme wealth, and in community, a very wealthy community. On the other hand, my mother and I at different periods lived in very, very low socioeconomic communities. And what I noticed, and again, this is through the eyes of a child, so who knows what it would be like from an adult perspective, but what I noticed was in the wealthier communities, there was a lot of fear. And, this is a protectionism. This is mine, this is yours. I'll express wealth or love or care. They were very interconnected, and there wasn't always heart in it. And there wasn't, it was, if you were struggling, it was difficult to say, I'm struggling, could you help? Whereas in the poverty communities, lower socioeconomic communities, everybody was in it together. So if you needed help, everybody was there to help one another. And that sense of community rather than isolation, maybe that's a better way to say it, was greater. And so that has always touched me, is why was it that there was more love, care, mutual support in the lower socioeconomic community and not as much in the wealthier community? What is this? What is it that we're striving for, certainly in the US, about how do we define success? Because what it felt like from my worldview was that it was more supportive and nurturing in one environment, and the other you were more alone. And so that really started to raise questions about what is success in life? What does it mean to thrive? What makes you feel good? What makes you feel safe when you go to bed at night and close your eyes? What makes you feel like you've contributed to the world, and how do you help one another and impact one another? And I'm reflecting now, Rick, on one of your pieces where you talked about the golden rule, right? How we treat others. And then I'm also thinking too about the platinum rule, which is treat other people how they wish to be treated. And so that sort of lays the platform for what's the world that we're building. And those are kind of some of the undergirding of the questions that I'm looking at. And if I then jump to that story, I'll sort of weave the thread here of earning my PhD, which was in leadership and change. And the program was rooted at the intersection of social justice and organizational development. And so our cohort was very much constructed in a manner which was very equitable. It was a very diverse room, split between genders, split between ethnic or racial backgrounds. And I got schooled. I got really schooled with such gratitude. I mean, even though I had always worked in the social justice area, there were certain stories that came to my mind that really made me think about white privilege. So the one that always sticks out is, what color are Band-Aids? Whose skin tone, when you buy skin tone, whose skin tone are we talking about? And then the other big thing, which now is such a no-brainer, but at the time I am embarrassed to say that I use, well, I don't see color. I'm colorblind. I just see people. I just see equitable, equity. And wow, the silence in the room when I said that was deafening. And that's the point of which the schooling really brought in. It's like saying you don't see somebody's story, right? And I know since George Floyd event, murder, that these kinds of conversations have become much more mainstream and much more part of the, I don't know if we could say zeitgeist, but certainly terms that people are more conscious of now. So I think that there has been some progress around equity, but yet we have so far to go. So I think that, when I think about equity, these are the areas that I go to. And then how do we change policy? How do we help people shift their consciousness so that it is a more just way? I'm just looking for one thing. The part of when I think about equity and when I look at the systemic changes that are needed, I come up with a series of questions that I cannot for the life of me remember which one of my colleagues asked me this, but it's in any kind of situation, what or who is being served? What is being tested? What is being strengthened? What is trying to die and fall away? And what is trying to be born or birthed? And when I look at issues of equity in the world that we're building, and when I look at, what does our democracy look like? How is the world that we're creating? And how do we do this shift into a more equitable world? I think the heart winds up being the most, the best place to start, because we get to do some self-awareness and look at who are we and how did we get to the thoughts that we have. And I want to take a pause for a minute because I want to sort of check in. I'm not used to, I can stand in front of a classroom and lecture, but I'm not a big fan of lecturing. I'm really much more of a Socratic method where we engage. And I want to take a pause and see if any of what I'm saying is touching you. What are your thoughts? Can we make this into more of a dialogue? Like, does that work, Rick? Are you?
Absolutely. Generative dialogue. You're just setting the stage, let people chime in if somebody has a question. I can see one person who looks as though she's biting at the bits to say something. She wrote in the chat. If you feel so inclined, by all means, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Dear Lisa, what you have been telling me, it's like my guidance voice inside me in each and every single situation, but I really never put them into words. And while you are saying that, oh, this is how I think in each and every single situation, and really is the decision-making process, and feel content with given decisions in my life, even though it may not seem or approved by everybody, but I can still stand my decisions just because I have this internal dialogue inside me. So, but I never put them into words, and you spoke so well, and you explained so fluently. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I have to ask, Nazrin, are you from Turkey?
Yes, I am from Turkey. I kind of remember you from previous events, I guess. I guess I see you before.
Yeah, I recognized. I spend a lot of time in Turkey, and so your name I recognize your name, the sound and letters of your name. So I just want to then take a moment and say thank you for being here, because I love that it's an international audience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your international sharings, maybe universal.
Well, I think, when we're talking about equity, certainly it's an interesting question, because, and this is the work that I do with inner economy, is where does it touch as the individual and where does it touch with the collective? And what is the impact the individual has on the collective, and how in turn does the collective affect the individual? And so certainly, even Turkey has its historical issues with the Kurds and such. And in our country, we have, whether it's indigenous folk or whether it's African American or Latinx or Native American, there's so many. I'll put it in a positive way. I'm looking forward to the day when we have the courage to look inside of ourselves enough and address our fears and our shadow side so that we can truly build into a more inclusive environment. Because we have become so far into the self and othering that we've forgotten the thread that ties us together, which actually causes us to, rather than celebrate, oh, there's a difference, isn't that interesting, and approach with curiosity and wonder, instead to be like, oh, self and other, that's fear, keep it at bay. And I have to digress for a moment, because one of the books that I'm working on right now is on leadership and spirituality. And actually, Rick, this goes to some of the conversation we had yesterday, which is in indigenous cultures or in many of the African cultures. And this is my understanding from working with the authors in these chapters. But we've been talking about how the concept of leadership and spirituality are not a separate issue, because spirit is inherent in every single human being. And that denotes by default leadership. So to separate the two is absurd. And similarly, I just heard a story yesterday. I don't think it was within our conversation, but I know it was, oh my goodness, what's her name, was speaking, who wrote Love, Pray, Eat, Love, Pray. I can't remember the name of the author, but she was talking about how the Dalai Lama, when he first came to the West, before everyone knew who he was, somebody asked him the question is, how do we stop self-hatred? And the interpreter struggled to get him to understand. And he literally, based upon his culture and worldview, didn't understand. Like, who do you hate? He asked. Why do you hate them? Wait, what? He was completely blown away by this reflection of self-hatred. And so when we talk about equity, there also has to be an element of looking at how do I want to say this without it coming? There has to really be good, strong self-awareness. Why don't I say it like that? Because if we're hating ourselves, inevitably we're hating parts of ourselves, we will inevitably project it out onto somebody else when we see a difference. And so it may not be conscious. A lot of this isn't conscious. And so it's to make the unconscious conscious, to make that which is unmentionable, speak about it, because what's the phrase? That which is unmentionable becomes unmanageable, I think too, that we have to learn to, or allow ourselves the door to be comfortable in the discomfort. These are conversations and changes that are not comfortable we feel it even in our bodies, the discomfort. And coming from the background of the healing arts, and Rick, I was intrigued that you come from a medical background too, which that means part of the heart is of being of service and helping people heal. And so if we're, by looking at our shadow side, looking at the places where we feel uncomfortable in our bodies, and can have the courage to stay with that discomfort and track it, we can learn so much of ourselves and our biases and our fears, and begin to address those. So I see some heads nodding. I see some reflections. Does anybody want to jump in or add anything?
I recently take therapy, and I don't really have psychological problem or anything, but therapy is not like something we need to solve a problem, but more like beneficial to perform each week at least, just as we brush our teeth. And I really learned a lot. basically, I started it for enhancing my sleeping quality, and I end up with discovering myself much better. So, increasing awareness just because I started to get know more about me, better about me, like know yourself motto in Greek mythology to matriz and all philosophy fields. In then philosophy as well, it's about how to know yourself dilemma, because it says for one to know oneself, they need to look themselves from other aspects. So this would create duality. However, they say to be able to discover oneself, what necessary is singularity. So it says, though we try to know ourselves, we cannot really truly know ourselves because we need to look at ourselves from other aspects, which creates duality, which is opposite to knowing yourself. There is singularity. So that's a dilemma and never-ending journey, maybe knowing ourselves simply. And it's really the most intriguing thing to know oneself, for me at least, much more than what I need to say. I don't want to mean like narcissism or egoism, but more like it is really very nice to discover things about yourself that you are not even aware of. And that peace, that can only enhance with peace, actually, self-peace, whether you have done mistakes or not, whether you were right or not. At that situation, at that conditions, that's what you can do, and you have done it. So you are at peace with that. Then
That's
just
right.
as you said, you have no hate.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I speak a
Oh,
lot.
no. Yeah. It's lovely to see you so excited and engaged. I love it. And I'm watching Rosario with her smile and speaking. So do you want to go ahead and respond, Rosario? Because I see it go. I'm watching the like bubbles come out.
Yes. Hi. My name is Rosario, and I totally agree with what you're saying, Lisa. As I put in the chat, I think the whole problem about equity, well, not the whole problem, part of the problem of the equity is the, I'll call the lies that we tell ourselves to ourselves. It's that little voice inside that says that we don't deserve something, that we don't look like wide enough, or in my case, or tall enough, or skinny a lot, or young enough, wherever it is, to fit. And if I don't, then that is gonna be other people not like me as much. So it's just that programming, and I've been working on it for years and years and years. I'm an immigrant to the United States, and with all the things that come around being an immigrant comes, even the language. When I came, I didn't even knew any English. So, and I work in the finance sector, and I did very good, and I'm not working anymore. But that progression of what we need to do we need to change that little thing inside, that programming. I call it programming. It's like a software that we're running in a software that is not serving us, and individually and as a community, and because everybody has their own programming, and I think that's the work. At least for me, it's been the work, and I think it's a life work. And I'm the first time participating in this community right now, and all the aspects that Rick is presenting. And I was reading the page, some of the things that he's wrote, and it's just like it hits me so right in my heart, because that is the work that we need to do. Yeah. There is no other work that we need to do but that.
100%. I agree.
That's it.
If I could
Thank
just
you.
chime in here from experience yesterday, there was an interesting conversation that Lisa was a witness to, and one of the things was, well, how do you create the attractor that people want to come together? That's a big question about how to do that effectively. And the other is, how can we create this type of experience that we're having now, but allowing more people into the experience? Because at the end of the day, if people have positive experiences and it's really meaningful for them, they cannot help but share it with other people. And the best marketing is when people have good experiences and they want to share it and they want to attract other people to it. I don't have the secret sauce, but I can certainly point in the right direction. So anybody would like to chime in on that one? I see, Kathleen, you put your hand up, so chime in.
Thank you, Rick and Lisa. Deeply appreciated that introduction and sort of the umbrella of your work. And I feel such a kinship around that, especially as it relates to inviting people into conversations that they just wouldn't have unless they were specifically included in them. So I was reflecting on working at Denver University.
Uh-oh, I think we lost you. Oh, and Rick, I see your mouth moving and you're on mute, and David just said something. So I'm going to jump in then, if that's okay. Okay. So I'm loving where we're going here, because it's really at a very interesting intersection about sort of really, what does it mean to be human? And this is something that I'm really looking at, especially, and since we're here with Witty, we have to address the technology component, which is in the face of regenerative AI and where technology is going. What is it that makes us different? What is it? And some argue, we got into some conversation the other day about consciousness, right? But also it's about, what does it mean to be in this body? And what is the body? What are the stories the body tells? What are our feelings and our emotions? What are our social constructs? What are our cultural constructs? What are the biases? What is our programming? Because really, the computer is just, it's a concrete, not living, breathing version in a way of what a human is. It's pre-programmed. It does all kinds of mechanisms and actions, right? So then if we're looking to be in charge, or maybe not be in charge, but work in conjunction with this already evolving consciousness within technology, how do we differentiate? And that is really going to be through self-awareness. And because we have a responsibility, because we are literally shaping, we are raising the technology, right? So if we want it to be for good and do not do harm, that means we need to look inside. We need to say, what is it that we're doing that creates harm that the machine is learning from? You know, when you look at the data of, it's like, if you watch, oh my God, my brain this morning, you know, you read the research of who is doing the programming and the lack of female or not just gender, but race of the programmers who got laid off recently. So therefore, who is continuing to build the lineage for the direction technology is going? It's a real serious question. It's a real serious issue that we're facing. And so this is our time. This is our beautiful opportunity to wake up. And in some ways, it really is like waking up from a bad dream. Because the reality that we have built has done so much harm that it's been a nightmare.
If I could just introduce a slightly different frame, you said programming, but I would say that there's indoctrination, which is a little stronger, and that we're all indoctrinated in different ways. We're not even aware of it. And so, you know, I hate these words, but, you know, you can't help but not use them. But how can the unwoke become woke, so to speak? And who says who's woke and who's not who's unwoke? Right. You know, who decides that? That's you know, right. It's hilarious what's going on.
That's right. That's right. And that conversation becomes a detractor from the real truth of what we need to be doing and looking at.
May I ask you to re-explain about dream and waking up from nightmare part?
Sure. So You know, have that moment when you wake up from a bad dream and you open your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, and there's fear in your body. And it's actually, if it's a bad enough nightmare, you wake up and you're like, whew, okay, now I can reprogram myself and build a better day from the nightmare. What I'm referring to is the collective nightmare that we have built, in which so many people are being harmed, certainly at the level of their heart, but also we're harming our planet. We have built a nightmare. They're beautiful, you know, like a good nightmare dream. There are moments in the dream where you're like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. And then the shark comes and eats you, you know, or whatever it is. They're the moments where there's magnificence, but the overarching theme of a bad dream really, it has you in terror. And I would say that on the collective level, we have built a nightmare, unfortunately. And so when we look at that, how do we want to wake up? And I know that to your point, Rick, the term woke has become co-opted and a tool actually to help keep us separate, which is the whole irony of that. Anyhow, were you going to say more, Rick? Or although Lisa looked also
No, I was just going to allow people who haven't spoken in the spirit of equity to speak up if they'd like to. If they'd like to listen, that's fine. But does anybody not spoken would like to chime in? No pressure. I'm quite happy to take the flow of the conversation, but
okay. Well, this is an interesting conversation. I'm Lawrence Perry. I'm in contact with you from Spain. Albeit I don't speak Spanish, and I'm a retired nurse practitioner from the UK, and I have moved globally. I think you have an interesting story. I think it's an interesting conversation. This is towards 6 p.m. my time. It's quite late because I've been quite busy today and lots of calls, but I'm kind of introducer and I know people globally. Thank you, Rick. I haven't been in really these conversations for a long time, but just had a break. I don't think I've spoken to you for a year or so, Rick, but I did bump into the last session of this. And let's see, I think it's an interesting story. And I think women's rights are more and more under attack by 3% of the population. But then again, 3% of the population vying for, recognition. They do that through Hollywood films. They do this through a different type of media, trying to persuade, you may disagree with the 5 genders or the 2 genders or whatever, but, your country in America is especially pushy about foreign agenda. Mm-hmm. And for a country like Uganda and Kenya, they stopped funding them, even on the world monetary stage, because they didn't exactly accept things with these genders as they wanted to. So a lot of what we hear in the media is manipulation. Mm-hmm. Media companies want to sell stories. They want to make it interesting for the people who listen, so that they give us a version of truth, which isn't quite the same. But I'm enjoying listening to you, Lisa, and I will try to be in a few more of these things. And thank you. That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just weigh in a little bit, just changing the subject a little bit. I'm originally from San Francisco, and I visited last weekend. And what I recognized, and I didn't realize how bad it was, but these young men, usually 3 to 5, and they're coming all races, but they're all young. They're running around, breaking into cars. And it wasn't just the tourist cars, but now they're breaking into people's cars that live there. They have these machines, and it takes literally seconds. And we had rented a car, and they told us 7 cars had to be brought back in the same day. And then, of course, they closed Nordstrom, and I didn't understand why, but young people are going in and taking stuff within seconds. And so when I went to the grocery store, there was 2 police officers there. So it's become a police state, and it's just chaotic. It's epidemic. It's really wild. And I bring all this up because I do believe that the social contract has been broken, and these young people don't feel that they have a stake in the system, and they weren't provided on an equitable basis, access to education, opportunities, and this is what they've resorted to. And it's going to impact us all. I mean, and now I follow stuff on Instagram so I can prepare myself, because I have to go to San Francisco in a couple of weeks. And if you're stalled on the way to the freeway and there's something in your trunk, they will get your stuff out within seconds. I mean, it's really, really bad. And it's eventually going to make its way down the coast, I'm sure, because at some point people are going to stop putting stuff in their car. And then what are they going to do? Because now they've created systems generating income, and they're going to have to replace that with something else, and they will. And I think from a bigger, larger system, we need to think about how the contract has been broken. And I remember when George Floyd was murdered, and in the office, folks were talking about, they were crying and screaming about the buildings being torn down, and then I had to even tell my boss, I said, you had an all hands meeting talking about one of the buildings being desecrated, but you didn't mention the murder of a man. And she didn't even get it until I told her that. People are not just hurting buildings because of hurting buildings. They're hurting buildings because the contract has been broken. And why should folks adhere to the contract when they see things like, so it's really it's a big issue, and it's coming home to roost in California really, really badly. And we need to figure out what to do and how to give these young people a sense of opportunity and hope, so they don't have to go around breaking into people's cars, because that is not a long-term sustainable way of life. But it's really, really bad. So that's just something that's been on my heart, because I just experienced it last weekend.
I'm so glad you shared that. I'm just sitting with it for a moment, because what you're making me think about is 2 things. One, that, women continue to make up the majority of low-wage workers in California, while roughly half of all Latino, Black, and Native American workers earned less than 33,000. I think it was like 32,300 or something like that, or less in 2021. And so when you look at the economic system, and then you look at how that ties into housing, and I know that's not specifically, Lisa, what you're talking about, you're talking about something much deeper, but it's not, it's like, so we have this systemic problem, which you're discussing the results of, and the disassociation of, but then you have, how do people live? How are we supporting people? I'm of the belief housing is a human right. And when we look at what's happening with housing in our country, specifically in California, it's horrific. Our rents are beyond accessible, where you have multiple people living in a 1-room apartment, like 5-10 people living in a 1-room or studio apartment. So there's nothing, to your point about the contract being broken. The image of the American dream, in quotes, but which sort of permeated around the world, is a lie. And when we talk, when I am just sort of sitting with your comment about this woman talking about the buildings, and what about the man who's been murdered? I mean, this kind of, you go back to how I started this conversation about my own experience about equity. In the poorer neighborhoods, there was love and connection, and everybody, if you needed a cup of sugar, your neighbor showed up with it. If they needed eggs, you showed up with it. Whereas in the wealthy community, it was, what's your 16-year-old child, what kind of car are they driving? Mhm. You know, and so that's kind of why I bring in the socioeconomic piece of it, because there's this component of how do we, unfortunately, we live in the States in a capitalist system that is breaking, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
It's not working. Go ahead, Rick. I see you.
I was just going to say, Lisa, I don't think the contract has been broken. I think there's a contract on America that needs to be broken, which is a slightly different take, because the outcome of this inequities, the civil strife that's going to emerge, it's going to get worse, unfortunately. This is not going away.
No.
And the likelihood of more acts of mass shootings, white supremacists, domestic terrorism. My nightmare, if you want to know, if you look what's happening in Ukraine with these drones, which is not very, you could have drone attacks in America with terrorists. I tell you, that is going to be a nightmare for any, that's one of my fears. If you just watch what's happening, if you've been watching what's happening in Ukraine and how effective some of these inexpensive drones can do incredible devastation, just to evoke fear. So I think the nightmare could get a lot worse.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it doesn't have to. If enough people in a moment said, "I'm done with the old way. This is not working, and I'm going to even just focus my intention and my heart, mind, and soul on both doing my inner work. Where am I holding fear? Where am I holding prejudice? Where am I holding lack of abundance or lack of what is available? Or where am I preventing creativity from flowing?" Then we start to have interesting conversations. I was reminded yesterday, I had this conversation. I sit on a board of a housing organization that does rapid response housing. And one of the staff members came to me and was very unhappy about some things that were going on in the organization. She was feeling targeted by some of the leadership, that she was the only one having to do things. She was in pain. And she came at me with all of the like technical issues, but actually what was the underlying issue was she was in pain. She was not feeling heard or seen. And as soon as I realized that, and we started to shift the conversation about, okay, so you're telling me all of the problems, what are the solutions? And suddenly she was empowered to think like, oh, how can I solve this? What can I do to make it better? And then she was also appreciative that she was able to be heard and seen, that she was in pain. And when I shift the conversation that we're in this point of pain, we're waking up from that nightmare and we're trying to decide what is reality. And if we decide, well, we can choose to do joy, love, care, kindness, compassion, interdependency, honor, dignity, care, respect, love, then we have a very different conversation. Going back to that conversation I heard about the Dalai Lama, he talked about, which we get to decide. We get to decide whether we live in a world where we think everybody's trying to harm us, or a world where everyone cares for us. And depending upon which worldview you hold, it's going to determine how you go forward and how you navigate with one another. So I find myself thinking about that. And yeah, I'm watching some heads and I feel like I've talked for a bit. So
no, it's fine. No, I was just going to say we should begin to wrap up. And one of the things that I took away from yesterday's conversation was that so many threads have been threads of conversations are here. And I think one of the things we need to avoid doing is turning these threads into full stops. They should be commas. And what are you going to carry on doing?
Right.
because we can come to isolate, and there's no connection between one thing and the next. And so how can we facilitate better connections so that over time you're developing a tapestry of a better future? So I would like to allow everyone to have a quick, what's your thread that you're taking away from this conversation that you might want to continue on beyond this session here today? Any threads that come to mind?
I am really touched by the equity perspective from each culture in terms of ethnicity. Like sometimes when we are living in Istanbul, multicultural city, it's like everybody's almost equal, but it's not really how it is in Turkey, all borders and cities. So this came to my realization. Thank you, Lisa and Marie, for that.
Thank you.
Other threads?
Sure, I'll jump in. I'll say it's not a zero-sum game. I think that's how a lot of people approach these things. We're in a significant time in history now with generative AI and how it's changing a lot of things, and how we can educate the young people to leverage these tools to find new opportunities. Because if there's lack of hope, like Lisa Marie was saying, they're going to break into stores or nourish, right? They're going to figure out ways to get it. So we just have to give them other things where they see possibility. And if not, we can't get mad at them for doing what they do, right? All of us would. So anyway, those are my comments.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. We can't get mad at others about what they do with their programming. They have, like we talk about, the programming or the indoctrination, like Rick said, is what they have. And it's, in my mind, it's like expecting water from a rock. I mean, you're not going to get water out of that rock. You have to understand that it's a rock, and that's it. It's not going to give you water. So accept it and change what you can change. Like Lisa was saying, is first it's a work, individual work, but it's not only, I'm not going to go on the summit of a mountain and sit there and do the work as a monk and just do me. That many people do. I said we have to do that internally, but being in the community, like Lisa Marie was mentioning, that the only solution to all the ailments of our community is be in community, and not thinking that individualistic idea that I did it. I came out here, I'm the rich person, and I'm going to do with the land and the people and my workers the way that I want to do. No, you are part of the community as well. So if all think individually, kind of like Rick is saying, wake up individually, but at the same time in community, work and help each other. And then we can make, perhaps elect better candidates and make some projects that had to do with water in all the West, because I live in Arizona, so water is a huge problem, and here too. But we are like making, awful solutions that we're only thinking about 5-10 years when we have to be thinking 200 years from now. So anyways, that's all I want to say. And yes, so interesting, so grateful, Rick and Lisa Marie and David, for everything. Thanks.
I'll just throw out that I think self-awareness is really critical, and just doing the work that everybody's echoed. That's what I'm trying to deprogram myself. I mean, I just started really learning about my history to better understand how and why African Americans didn't do as well as other immigrants. And I'm just now learning forget the reparations for slavery, but there were laws that we couldn't live in certain areas of neighborhoods that kept us from wealth. We didn't get access to the GI Bill. And when we built up communities like Rosewood or Tulsa, they were torn apart and we had to start over and over and over again. We weren't allowed in certain places. And so now I'm beginning to understand that there were systems put in place to generate inequities, at least among the African American culture, because some thought was you just bring yourself up by the bootstrap. What are you doing? You're lazy. Da, 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 da. You learn all these things. And now, as a 50-plus-year-old woman, I understand that there were systems that kept African Americans away without access to certain tools and resources, why we still have huge levels of poverty and mindsets that the best way to handle it is through crime.
Yeah, Lisa, if you feel so inclined, no pressure, but I'd love if you're available to chat next week or the following week about your journey of self-awareness, I would be delighted, because I don't think you can do this in isolation. You have to do it in community, because you need people to present mirrors to the dark spots, your blind spots. And if you don't communicate, you're not going to see it. You know,
Right.
I don't have them, but I just put that offer out there. I don't want you to make a commitment, just an offer. But
It's not the next 2 weeks. I'm actually traveling. I'm in Chicago next week and DC the following. So how about October if you're still doing this?
Yes. and very I met somebody last night on a Clubhouse call. I put her name in. She is a pistol. I mean, this woman's got such far out ideas about recycling, the whole supply chain. I want to see if I can get her on next week or the following week. So if you can't come, take a look at her website. It's simple, but her message and what she's doing is so sort of out of the box that I've never heard anybody speak in this way about how our supply chains are designed for inefficiency and putting up prices. Anyway.
Well, thanks, everybody. I got to go.
Yeah.
Great, Lisa, you're wonderful.
Okay. Continue the threads of conversations wherever you may go. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Rick, I'm putting somebody for you to check out in the chat as well.